Good evening, everyone, and thanks very much for attending this evening. This is the second meeting of this council year of our Health and Adult Social Services Scrutiny panel. You're all very welcome, including members of the public that have come today, and we've got representatives that are asking questions. I'm just going to confirm the attendance online. So far we have Councillor Andrew Steed, the Vice Chair. I think we're also expecting Councillors Iqbal and Mutaza to join online as well. And our co-optee, Carleen Duffy from Healthwatch, should also be attending online too. Myself, Councillor Conti, Councillor Kate Crawford and Councillor Dinser are obviously here in the room. We have Roy Willis from Ealing Reclaim Social Care Action Group, who's joined the meeting online, and Eve Turner and Martin Eady from Ealing Save Our NHS are attending in person as well. This evening, so item 1 is apologies for absence. We've received apologies from Councillor Varleen Alexander. Are members aware of any other apologies? I should say welcome Councillor Nagpal as well. Any other apologies at all? No. On to urgent matters. We do have one urgent matter this evening. So I just need to inform the panel that the Ealing and Hounslow Community Voluntary Sector has been awarded a council grant for 23 to 27 to represent the voice of the voluntary and community sector, and that this means that from the 30th of September, Ealing Community Network will no longer be funded by the council to perform this role, and they'll shortly cease to exist. So I just wanted to thank John Chesters, who's been the representative of the Ealing Community Network, for his participation on this panel. This will be John's last meeting, and we'll be welcoming somebody from the new organisation to future meetings. But I did just want to say thank you very much, John, for all the work that you've done during the time that you've been representing ECN on the panel. Thank you. On to declarations of interest. Are there any declarations, either personal or prudential, from panel members at all? No. There are no matters that are to be considered in private this evening. Oh, I can hear my voice twice. Once is quite enough, I think. So that means that we'll go on to the minutes of the previous meeting. Can I take the minutes as a true and accurate record of our previous meeting? Are there any matters arising at all from the minutes? Thank you very much. So we are rattling through, and we are on to item number 6, which is the LGA Adult Services peer review progress update, and Kerry Stevens, our Strategic Director for Adult Social Services and Public Health, is presenting this report, and we're also really pleased to have Councillor Josh Blacker with us as the responsible cabinet member as well. For panel members and members of the public, this LGA Peer Challenge report was considered by our panel in July of 2023, and so this report provides the panel with an update on that LGA Peer Challenge. Adult Social Care has been developing a plan which sets out and monitors the delivery of the priorities against each of the key themes, and this is provided as Appendix 2, and a summary is outlined in Appendix 3 of the papers. And just to say, after we've heard from Kerry, Councillor Blacker, and we've dealt with questions from panel members, I'll also bring Roy Willis in, who has a couple of questions to pose as well. But I'll pass over to Kerry and Councillor Blacker.
Thanks, Sharon. Thanks for having me this evening. So I think, as you said, the peer review from February was a really positive document in many ways, highlighted a number of kind of very positive areas of our work, but it also poses a few challenges in terms of how we can improve. And so the action plan that you have, the delivery plan, sorry, that you have in two formats, because it's a very detailed copy, and then I think probably the summary that Kerry can take you through is our response to that. Obviously, the LGA review was focused around the 4 domains that CQC will come in and inspect us on in some way, shape, or form fairly soon-ish, perhaps. But what I want to say is, although obviously we are responding to the challenges posed by that review in those 4 domains, just aiming to get a good or outstanding in a CQC report is not why we are here. We are not here simply to meet some statutory box ticking exercise that simply says we are doing a good enough job. Which is why I think some of the delivery plan objectives are quite stretching. They say that although obviously the LGA said they were very impressed with the kind of strategic vision and the leadership that we showed to the service as an administration, that we are going to go a bit further, I think, and say we're going to set a new vision for adult social care, and that's in the pack, and we are going to deliver kind of as quickly as we can on some of the objectives we set out in the manifesto, and obviously the corporate plan, and the discussion we had at council last week on the update is also kind of relevant, I think, to your discussions. I think that's probably all I'll say as an introduction. Kerry can take you through some of the detail, but I think it's really great that you've asked us here to talk about this, because obviously we can do what we like in delivery boards and meetings internally, but having you to challenge us and to push us to deliver on it is really important to us. So I shall hand over to Kerry to talk you through, I think, some of the headlines from the delivery plan.
Thank you very much, Councillor Blacker. So very conscious, Chair, that there's a huge amount of detail here. So we've got 100-odd pages which set out the delivery plan for adult social care in response to the LGA, and Councillor Blacker mentioned in terms of the high aspirations that we have for local people and residents of the borough and Ealing. I'll be going straight to Appendix 3, which is slide 127 within members of the panel's pack, to provide highlights and updates in terms of the positions where we are in 8 specific areas of work, but more than happy to take any questions on the more detailed aspects of the paper leading up to that. So in terms of the LGA peer review completed in February 2023, 8 strategic priorities have been agreed within the service in terms of how we set out our response to the aspirations for residents of the borough. There's a clear programme of governance and oversight that I chair within adult social care to keep us on track and ensure that our performance is monitored and progress is made, and where progress and additional resources need to be considered, that we take that into account in terms of risks and issues. As of September 23, we can show that there's evidence of progress within all 8 areas, but I'll take them through one priority at a time. So the first priority that we had set through the LGA and our overall review of performance within the service was to reset a strategic vision for the service and to improve our communications with local people, to set out a refreshed adult social care strategy, to relaunch the vision, and to ensure that it's aligned with the corporate and the council plan, and to reshape the communications with the local population. And we've made good progress in terms of improving the vision and the strategy, and our new brand is Connected Communities and Better Lives. Previously it was Better Lives, but we're very conscious of the importance of community within the agenda that we've got for the organisation. We've developed new communication routes for members of staff within the organisation, so that's over 450 staff. It's important that we communicate the messaging with them on a regular basis and ensure and encourage engagement with managers within the organisation, and we have bi-monthly meetings with all staff, and people are encouraged to come and ask questions of senior management within the service. We've also launched a new newsletter, which has gone out to all residents in the last 2 weeks, and not all residents, to all individuals in receipt of services and their carers, to ensure that we've got the right information and that we're encouraging people to engage with us as an organisation, support their views and ideas about services influence how we structure our services. There's ongoing progress in terms of our commissioning strategies, people with learning disabilities, people with mental health needs, and an autism action plan. We're also in the middle of a carers commissioning strategy, which we expect to be completed by the end of this financial year. Refreshed council plan priorities, as Councillor Blacker mentioned, and linked with a very clear vision in terms of voice and choice, integration and communities. And the voice piece is something that we've discussed here before in terms of the refreshing of the partnership boards and development of a co-production model and greater engagement with the various voices of the communities that we serve within the borough. We've refreshed our social care booklets, and within all our refreshed data, refreshed information, we're encouraging individuals, whether they be people who use our services or the carers, to engage with the partnership board programme so that their voice can be heard. And also there's the ongoing programme of service user and carer strategies surveys, which will continue throughout this autumn and into the new financial year. The second, shall I just keep going, Chair? Yeah, I'm going to take questions at the end. The second area of focus, strategic priorities, are quality assurance practice, focus on continuous improvement in terms of social work and social care practice, and ensuring that good practice is shared across the service. We're making good progress in this area in terms of that we've got quality assurance boards where senior managers review practice and share the good practice on individual cases across the organisation. We're furthering embedding the role of the principal social worker within the organisation, which is a statutory function and has responsibility for training and support of social work staff. There's recently been appointed a new independent safeguarding chair, which is a joint role across adults and children's safeguarding. And this was highlighted as an area of risk by the LGA because the previous chair was leaving the organisation, and they've been replaced with a very strong replacement. We have regular oversight of case file work and case activity through case audits, and we provide quality assurance reporting on a quarterly basis to both the senior leadership team within the council, but also to the members and cabinet within the council, so that we're held to account in multiple different areas within council in terms of practice. In terms of workforce development and inequalities, it's really important that we've got a strong workforce in place to meet the needs of the local community, and that workforce, as far as possible, reflects the communities that we serve in Ealing. There's significant challenges in terms of recruitment and retention within social care across all areas, and NHS colleagues will reflect it's a very challenging space for them as well in terms of recruitment and retention. We've recruited I think it's 20 in total, unqualified social worker roles. We see this as a really important aspect of our future workforce strategy. We're looking to recruit local people who can work within the council where they live and work. And I think that would be a really strong opportunity to get greater influence of the communities that we serve. We've got a revised workforce strategy, which is in production. There is been some structural changes within the service to ensure that we have a single oversight of all social work practice. And we've got strong adult senior management representation in all the council's equality groups and involved in the work of the REC. Moving on, I'm going to have to stop for a drink of water in a minute, but moving on to strategic priority number 4, this is about community development, engagement and co-design. As mentioned earlier, we've brought the paper here in terms of engagement around the partnership boards. We've just agreed additional funding to recruit to a short-term post to ensure that the partnership board review is completed and implemented. We aim to have the co-production boards up and running before the end of this financial year. There's ongoing work around the implementation of the Health and Wellbeing Board strategy, which is very closely aligned with the work that we do within adult social care. So that provides a strong framework for us in terms of engagement and community development. We're also in the middle of completing a review of our direct payments offer. Direct payments offer individuals greater choice and control over their lives, and we see that as a really strong model for supporting community development and allowing individuals to have greater influence over how their needs are met. And we think that will be a key aspect of services going forward. We expect to have a plan in place for that probably in the next financial year, and we're working with the wider council around the 7 towns development and planning for services. I'll take a quick sip of water if that's okay.
I think we can allow that.
Hiatus was. Strategic priority number 5 is market management. Obviously, the vast majority of services that are provided to vulnerable people by the council are procured from the private or third sector. They're hugely influential in terms of the quality of experience for people who live in Ealing who have eligible needs under the Care Act. We've implemented the uplift in the real living wage for people working in the community, and that's impacted on over 2,500 individuals' wages that they receive. So we're extraordinarily pleased in terms of being able to do that. One, in terms of the stability that provides within the market, but also too that we know that a lot of the people working in the care sector live local, and this increase in wages during challenging times of the cost of living crisis has been very timely. We've also worked very closely with the care sector to support the quality of services, and a byproduct of that is seeing an improvement in CQC rating for registered services, and the quality of services rated good or outstanding is now above 70% in the borough, which is very positive. And there's ongoing work across the partnership in Ealing with care providers, in terms of NHS partners, in terms of the provider sector, to improve the quality of the offer within care homes, which we think is hugely important. The dynamic purchasing systems are technical procurement arrangements that we have in place to manage the market, and they're being rolled out for care homes and home care services currently. Priority 6 moves into demand management and the processes that are in place to promote independence and support people live as independent lives as possible. Significant amount of work in this space because we're seeing sustained and increased demand on services as a result of the cost of living crisis post-COVID and the challenges that are being faced within the NHS. This is being implemented through strengthened review of social work functions. A huge amount of work has gone into working with colleagues in children's services around young people transitioning into adulthood and how we can support better information and support to young people and their families going through this challenging time in their lives. Strong oversight in terms of our financial position. I know we're going to be bringing that back to this committee at some point in the near future. And we're also implementing digital financial assessments, which will support local people complete their financial assessments more effectively online. And that's not going to be a requirement that people have to do that digitally. That's an option in terms of a digital option. On to priority number 7. This is working in partnership with Health and Housing. So we've refreshed our Section 75 arrangements and the Better Care Fund recently, and just really want to reflect the strong working in Ealing between the council and our NHS partners within this space. It's been particularly difficult and challenging this year in terms of the refresh of the Section 75 and the BCF. But I think the strength of relationships in Ealing have enabled us to work through that process effectively. We're also working more closely with colleagues in housing and regeneration in light of how we can maximise the impact of the housing capacity in the borough to support vulnerable adults within the borough. And we're also working on concepts and design currently for developments to support people eligible for adult social care needs going forward. Last one, and this is strategic priority number 8. This is statutory change and preparation for the CQC inspection readiness. And as Councillor Blacker said, we expect CQC to land any time from January onwards. So we need to ensure that we're prepared for that, but that's secondary to ensuring we provide the best possible quality services to local people. So we've completed self-assessments. We went through the LGA peer review. We were the first in London to complete that. We're engaging with London ADAS, the Association of Directors of Adult Social Services, in terms of their assurance programme. We are doing new prototypes for client level data submitted to DHS, Department of Health and Social Care, in July. There's new data sets that are coming out from national. I can go on about this for hours in terms of the new data sets. Oh no, I've just lost my page. Sorry, I've got it. Thank you. The Offlog is a performance framework that national government is starting to push in terms of different ways of looking at services. We're also looking to bring in additional capacity for a short period of time to help us to develop our assurance frameworks within adult social care and look to potential additional roles within the service to make that an embedded system for how we keep oversight of performance and practice within the service. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kerry, and Councillor Blacker as well. That was comprehensive. And before we get into questions, can I just thank you and the team for the huge amount of work that you're doing, and also the approach that you've taken in being so transparent with this committee, providing the action plan and also the summary as well. Panel members will have noted that on the work programme for December, there's a number of items that Kerry referenced in his comments, particularly around direct payments, the partnership boards, looking at the budget in more detail, and also the Safeguarding Adults report. So there will be further opportunities to comment on those areas. But can I take any questions from panel members? Councillor Conti.
Thank you. I just had sort of 2 questions really, both in regards to in Appendix 2, RAG rate, sort of different parts of the plan. I noticed that quite a few of the red RAG rate ones were about equalities. So, and I think it was referenced in one of them that one of them was about the recruitment for the equalities and engagement post. And I was just wondering, is that what is holding back sort of the red rating on the other ones? There's, for example, one on support and sustaining sort of the BAME and wider staff equalities group, and delivering the equalities plan. Obviously, if there is a recruitment freeze and you can't recruit someone into that post, how are you going to mitigate that? So how are you going to ensure that the equalities aspect is going to be met, irrespective of whether someone's recruited? And my second question was, there's one of the other red ones is that there's a £1.3 million risk due to 14 providers seeking historical fee alignment. So if that were to sort of come through and the council were having to pay that, how is that going to be mitigated in terms of the budget? How's that going to be funded?
Can I just check before Kerry comes in, are there any other questions from panel members? Because I can take them in threes. Or will Councillor Crawford, over to you.
So I think I'm just going to duplicate what you're saying, which is when will the recruitment freeze with which we were told that there's going with an update due in September? Is there an update? And when will this freeze be ended? And what the time frame for recruitment to this position would look like?
Thanks very much, Councillor Crawford. Any other comments from panel members? I'll come to you after councillors, if that's okay. I have 2 comments myself. I just wondered if you would be able to provide a bit more information about some of the challenges in terms of recruitment, and for Councillor Blacker or yourself, Kerry, just a bit more information in terms of the problems with the issues in terms of the Better Care Fund and how we might overcome those in future years.
ICF.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the questions, and I think it's really helpful, as we said, to bring this to scrutiny to get the questions in terms of the areas of risk and challenge. The recruitment of somebody to come into the equalities post is something that we've been really struggling with in terms of the size of the financial challenges that we face as a service due to the demands and pressures that I've described previously here, Councillor Conti. There is a wide-ranging work programme in terms of equalities within adult social care. It's absolutely key to the work that we do. We've recently agreed to bring in some short-term resource to work on the equalities work and also to work on the implementation of the partnership boards. That was agreed last week for this financial year only, and then to review the position at the end of the financial year to understand what that looks like going forward. The expectation is that will move us forward in terms of the implementation of the equalities agenda, the engagement process through the co-production boards, which are absolutely key to that piece of work, but we will keep that under review going forward. Is that okay in terms of the equalities piece?
Yeah.
Do you want to come in?
I guess the other thing is just how, obviously, you mentioned I don't know how many staff are in your department, but obviously hundreds of staff. I guess it's how that sort of, because obviously it's important having someone who pushes that forward, but it's how you disseminate that. So equalities is part of everybody's role to some level, or integral to what they do. So is that part of when you talk about delivering the equalities plan, is that part of it? Is how you sort of inform and educate your wider staff?
Absolutely, and equality from a social care perspective, and that social work, occupational therapy, and the associated staff that we have working within the department, the equalities agenda should be an absolute key aspect of what we do every day in our working lives, and I think that's really important to recognise. So the principal social work will have a very strong role within this space, but the additional capacity and resource to project lead on some of the change agenda is going to be key. Is that okay? In terms of the fee alignment and negotiations, there are significant challenges within the marketplace currently in terms of inflationary pressures, and as well in terms of market instability. The care home market, specifically in North West London, is the least stable that I've seen in the 4.5 years that I've been in Ealing. We are taking very strong negotiation stances with providers. We've provided inflationary uplifts in Ealing to care homes to make up some of the shortfall in the fee comparisons compared to other boroughs. There are always challenges in terms of the negotiations and what happened. So we have a list of all the care providers that we're in negotiation with. Some of the negotiations are beneficial compared to our assumptions, and some of them are non-beneficial and compared to our assumptions at the start of the financial year. We tend to start with quite a conservative, risk-averse position in terms of what we think the financial outturn will be. And I'm being assured by my colleagues within the commissioning and the market engagement service that we are nearly there in terms of the final position. There's no further risk within it. I think the size of the financial risk in terms of ongoing negotiations is something in the region of 100 to 200,000, not the 1.4 that was reported at this stage. Shall I carry on? Yeah. In terms of the recruitment and retention challenges, as mentioned earlier, it's a significant challenge. Qualified staff, specifically occupational therapists and social workers, are very difficult to recruit to currently. We're reviewing how we promote Ealing as an exciting and vibrant and interesting borough to come and work in, and I think there's been some really good work done around that corporately within the council. We're taking some of the lessons from there. We know that there's a demographic issue in terms of the staff group working in adult social care. I think over 50% of the staff are over the age of 50, and what does that mean in terms of future planning? Part of our strategy is to look at our mix of staff within the organisation. We're very heavily weighted towards qualified staff currently. It's absolutely right that we need qualified staff to carry out statutory functions, but there are non-statutory functions that we can bring unqualified people in for. And also we've got a strong apprenticeship programme and development programme. So to bring those 20 unqualified staff into the organisation, the hope and aim is that a proportion of them will stay with us, become qualified, and then stay with us for even longer. But it is very challenging out there currently, Chair.
Thanks.
Do you want me to carry on?
Should I pick up the BCF?
Yeah, that would be great.
So I think the issue with the BCF negotiations this year was that, quite understandably, the ICB wanted further assurance and checks on how money was being spent across North West London, and NHS colleagues hopefully will kind of recognise that position, and just wanted to make sure that all 8 boroughs were kind of on the same page. I think what the issue from local authorities' perspective was that was decided very centrally, and was going to happen very centrally. Obviously, our position is that the BCF is a partnership. It is us and the NHS together, the ICB together, and that's not where I think we thought things had started. Obviously, to prevent that happening again, we would want to see at that ICB and North West London level the very close working relationships we have in Ealing with the BBP replicated. And I am reassured that the way forward now is that sense of partnership and a joint review. And I know the Chief Executive, I think Harrow, is involved in setting the terms of reference for the review. So local authority colleagues are very much involved now. So I think I can give you some reassurance that lessons have been learned by the appropriate parts of the system. And I think the way forward is a good one, and should avoid any problems repeating.
That's really reassuring to hear. I guess I think that the North West London Joint Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which I sit on, has got a critical role to play, and I've raised the issue of the Better Care Fund there so that we can have a sort of monitoring perspective on that. So I'm picking that up with the chair separately, but that's really helpful. Neha, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think just to reflect and definitely acknowledge everything that Councillor Black has just said, and recognise all of that and the role of North West London in trying to work across all 8 boroughs. And that's the change, the big change that's happened from the past. We were working as a single borough really, really closely as a partnership, but working across 8 is a different dynamic. And it is absolutely right, because there's a significant amount of money that goes into the Better Care Fund as a partnership, that we're getting the right outcomes for all of that money consistently across North West London. But it is also right to continue to review that year on year. And yes, we've got the terms of reference group starting to discuss what the next phase of that should look like. But from a local level and also from North West London level, so as a borough-based partnership, we definitely have a role to play in supporting that 8-wide conversation, but having those honest conversations, those transparent conversations, taking to the needs of the population into account, the variance between each boroughs, and then also being a part of that voice, not just the local authority or not just health. It is that very partnership, and I think we've got a role to play in making sure that is heard across North West London.
Thanks very much. So I will take more questions. I will just say we've got about 15 more minutes that are allocated to this item. So if we can keep the questions short and the answers short as well, we might get 2 rounds. So I'm going to take Dr. Taylor, and then I'm going to come to Councillor Steed.
So it's just a small point, Kerry, under strategic priority 6 on the demand management, we make reference to the digital financial assessments, and obviously often in situations where organizations have online functionality to submit their financial assessments or other information, often those digitally excluded individuals often have to wait longer than ones that actually submit online. So just need to make sure that in terms of the turnaround of those financial assessments, that those digitally excluded are not penalised in any way.
Thanks. So I'll take Councillor Steed next.
Thank you, Councillor. Two small points. Can you can Kerry give a bit more information on the issue about the mental health social work team moving into the operations directive? Again, could perhaps members of the panel receive copies of the various staff and resident newsletters that have gone out, please?
Thanks very much. I'll just see if there's a final question at all. What I might do just for this round is bring in Roy as well, and then we'll answer all of those questions together. So Roy, I think you've got a couple of questions. Did you want to unmute and ask them?
Hello. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for taking these questions. The first question is very specific about blue badges, and it is as a result of feedback from service users and carers that, as I said, it's been drawn to our attention that blue badge thefts are from parked cars are regularly being reported across the borough. This is causing distress, disruption and anxiety to disabled people and their families, as well as more work for the local police force. So what we're asking is how are social services working with the community safety team and the police services to provide more information and advice to blue badge holders on preventative measures, and then in the longer term suggesting that Ealing should encourage research on a more efficient, even a virtual or digital system of providing blue badges without offering criminals an easy way of snatching blue badges and then selling them on in some sort of blue badge black market, if I may say. So that's the first question. Shall I say this?
Yeah, please do give your second question as well, Roy. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. The second question, as Kerry has mentioned, the delivery plan mentions support for carers in various places, but it is a bit difficult to follow some of it. Could we have much more detail about how health and social services are going to support unpaid carers on a more perhaps with a more imaginative package of financial and practical measures, perhaps even some sort of charter for carers. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Roy. So Kerry, shall I come to you? Come to you now, Kerry. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the questions. So for Dr. Taylor, absolutely the importance of having a multifaceted approach for people to complete financial assessments is absolutely key to us. We think that the digital access portal will improve flow and therefore allow capacity to be focused on people who are unable to use that resource. So it's something that's very conscious in our head, and we're doing that in a lot of areas in terms of channel shift. I think the turn is into digital processes and really lobbying very strongly within the wider council about the importance of people who don't have access to digital devices. In terms of the question with regards to the mental health, the movement of the mental health service within adult social care, the management of the mental health social work teams previously sat within the trust. There's been lots of work to ensure that the impact of the line management of the social workers coming back into council oversight does an impact on the experiences of people who use our services. Teams are still co-located. There's a lot of joint working through the Mint teams between the NHS clinical function and the social care social function, and that continues to work well. However, the alignment of processes within social work functions, so there's a consistency of practice across all service areas, has been really important, specifically around safeguarding and other statutory functions within the council. In terms of blue badges, thank you for the question, Roy. I'll pick it up with my colleagues in the community safety team and look to share advice and information with Erskine representatives, but also look to promote it more widely through the co-production boards. I've not heard of the idea of a digital blue badge before, but it's something that I think potentially is outside of our control because it's a national scheme, but it's certainly something I can raise with colleagues responsible for the blue badges. In terms of the delivery plan and mention of carers in various places, and I'm sorry it didn't jump out of the page at you, but there's been some significant pieces of work that I'd just like to take you through. The council is very conscious of the impact of carers on the health and well-being of the borough as a whole. Informal carers have been significantly impacted through the cost of living crisis and the other crises that people in the community of Ealing are facing over the last 12 months. We have historically provided a fund for one-off payments to people who provide informal support within the borough. That usually lasts for the full 12 months of the financial year. This year, that fund was used up within the first quarter. So we've taken a decision to increase the fund by 300%. That funding's been provided through the Joint Investment Fund. So that is an integration of health and social care funding, and that will see 600 additional carers payments made this financial year to support people in their challenging and difficult but highly important roles within the community of the borough. As I think I mentioned earlier, we're also in the middle of our consultation process for the carers commissioning strategy, and expect that to be completed in early 2023. But would encourage members of this board to encourage their networks to engage within the consultation process around the carers strategy. We've also, I mentioned this earlier as well, very conscious in terms of how we're communicating with carers in the borough, and recently sent out a newsletter promoting access to information to people, and that's in a physical format. That's not an email, to everybody, to ensure that we're reaching the maximum number of people in the community. And we're expecting that newsletter to be repeated on a quarterly basis, promoting information and advice to local people about services.
Lovely, thanks very much, Kerry. And I think there was a specific request from Councillor Steed around sharing copies of the newsletter, and I can see you nodding, so I'm sure you'll be happy to do that. We've got time for probably one or two more questions at a push. Anything further from panel members at all? The room here has fallen silent. Any questions from colleagues online as well? I don't want to neglect you. Carleen. For those who don't know, Carleen is our new Health Watch representative, and you're very welcome.
Thank you very much. It's just around the sort of care homes in the borough, just sort of how we're going to mitigate capacity for the aging population. I'm just wondering if we've considered adding sort of safety nets into our plans for that.
Lovely. And I think our final question comes from Councillor Crawford.
Yeah, with regard to community development, the strengthening of 4F, the strengthening of local community resources is listed as requiring further scoping, and this is vital in ensuring that the community-based activities are effective. So is there an update on scoping, or an opportunity for the panel to be involved in this work?
Thanks, Councillor Crawford. Kerry and Councillor Blacker, over to you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
In terms of the care home beds, Ealing has got I think it's the third highest number of care home beds of any London borough. So we're highly resourced in care home beds. We're a net importer of care home placements. So, for instance, Hammersmith and Fulham have got 2 care homes, and they're placing the majority of their residents who require care homes into other boroughs, and a large number of them will come into Ealing. That puts significant pressure on social care and NHS systems as a result. The capacity, Carleen, is something that we keep a very close eye on. We're very conscious to work with the market to get a good understanding of where homes are under threat and challenge, and try and support the care homes maintain stability. Part of the work from the Care Home Summit, which was a multi-organisational meeting that was held earlier in the year, is that we're gathering data, which includes financial data, performance data and activity data within the care home sector, so that we as a health and social care system can provide support to care homes that we perceive to be under some threat. So it's something that nationally is a significant challenge in terms of the reducing number of care homes that are available. We also need to take into account that our strategic goal is to support more people in their own homes. So we're balancing the two. We're trying to support more people in their own homes, and we'll see shortly the drive to community and independence. But at the same time, where people do require care home placements, we need to monitor and support good quality. And it's one of my statutory functions as the Director of Social Care. Is that okay? In terms of Councillor Crawford's question with regards to community resources, part of our main drive within this space is around the development of a direct payments choice and control model councillor that will see individuals having greater influence on the micro markets that exist within their local communities, and development of services and offers that meet their needs rather than those that are structured by existing market arrangements. More than welcome to have members of this committee involved and to have sight of what we're doing in terms of the consultation processes and the ongoing discussions within that space.
Thanks very much, Kerry, and Councillor Blacker as well. So I'd just like to formally minute the committee's thanks. We'll continue to monitor the implementation of the action plan, specifically through the more in-depth reports that we're going to receive over the duration of the next year, but also through the quality assurance framework that will be forthcoming to the panel. And I think there's a particular recommendation for me to have to continue those discussions with my colleagues on the Joint Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee around the Better Care Fund. So we're very grateful for your time this evening, and I think we're sticking with you, Kerry, actually for the next item as well. So the next item on the agenda, item 7, is the Adult Social Care Quality Assurance Framework. This provides an updated overview on the state of quality within Ealing's adult services. It sets out a number of the contacts and referrals to the Social Care Advice and Referral Centre, the waiting times for assessments, admissions to care homes, care quality commission rating trends for providers in Ealing, and also case audit findings and survey results. So I will invite Kerry to just comment on the report, and then I will take questions from panel members as well.
Thank you, Chair. Another long report. If I can give a brief synopsis, is that okay? I think the aim with bringing the report to the scrutiny to the Health and Social Services Scrutiny Panel is to ensure that there's transparency in terms of the performance within the service, in terms of areas of challenge within the services, and areas of pressures that we're facing, but also to promote good practice and oversight of the work that we do. And within the report, you'll note on slide 144 of the pack, that we're seeing continued high levels of demand above levels that we've experienced in previous years. And as discussed earlier, there's a clear understanding that's associated with cost of living crisis, inflationary impacts on family homes, NHS waiting lists, and the challenges that people are facing within the community. The bit that I would direct the panel or suggest the panel look at is the proportion of individuals making contact with the service compared to those that are progressing to a BICA. A BICA, I don't know what it stands for, but it's effectively a social work assessment. So we're consistently sitting at around 10% of people contacting the service at the front door progress to a social work assessment. That's because good information and advice was provided to individuals when they contacted the council, and they could go off and meet their needs within the community. In the last 6 months, we've seen that increase to between 15 and 20% of contacts progressing to a social work service. And that is suggesting or highlighting the increased acuity of need that we're experiencing within the community and people that are presenting to social care. The next two slides refer to waiting times from contact to referral action, and then to completion of assessment. On slide 145, you'll see that there's an oscillation in terms of performance. This is because we've been doing a lot of work in terms of dealing with our backlogs of cases. There are a significant number of referrals that we receive from the police called Merlin reports. These are prioritised and risk assessed at the front door of the council, but we're now clearing the backlog of the low risk cases, and that is causing some oscillation in the waiting times from contact to assessment. Moving on forward through the packs, reviews, schedule reviews overdue by 18 months has been a strong area of focus for us. It's really important that we complete reviews of people in receipt of services to ensure that their needs are still being met, and that we're engaging with them in regard to the services that they receive. And there's been some significant improvement there, and there's continued focus within this space. The next slide talks to the point we were making earlier with regard to promoting independence and trying to support more people in the community, and continued strong performance there. I'm just going to touch on a few other points, if that's okay, Chair. The CQC ratings, which is on slide 152, shows the proportion of good and outstanding rating providers in the borough. This was on a trend of significant improvement through the last 6 months of the last financial year, and has dropped off slightly. Some of that's about registration of new providers coming into the marketplace without a registration, so they can't be good or outstanding when they're not registered. There are a couple of care homes that have dropped down from good to requires improvement as well, but the bigger impact is, I think we've had 4 new providers come into the system. Moving further through the report, ongoing market management and engagement I've discussed. We've talked here before about the partnership boards and the implementation programme within that space. I run 3 registered care services within the council services. We also run a number of directly provided services that aren't registered with CQC, and we keep a close eye in terms of the quality of the service that's provided by those services. And slides 166 through for the next 5 or 6 slides to 170 are talking about our internal systems for assurance and maintaining quality of services in both the registered provided services, but also the unregistered, because we know it's important to maintain those services. Slide 172 forward looks at case file audits. This is part of our assurance process for ensuring that the quality of social work practice is strong. The importance of this is in terms of the desktop review of practice in terms of casework that we have in the system. We've also implemented a program where we phone up and speak to the individuals whose case files we're auditing, because when I was doing this last year, there's sometimes a significant difference between what the record says and what individuals' experiences are. So it's really important that we get both sides. Just referring you to the table on 173 that shows a number of unacceptable cases. And I think that's really important. If we're not seeing unacceptable cases coming through the case file audits, we're not being stringent enough with our expectation and aspirations for the service. There's also a number of actions here in terms of our learning. And then I've just noticed there's a repetition of the strategic goals for the service, which just adds to the volume. So a lot of information again there, Chair, but happy to take any questions from the information that's involved.
Lovely, thanks very much, Carrie, and lots to potentially explore there. Questions from panel members? Yeah, Alan, and then Councillor Conti.
Thank you. I've got some concerns with care homes for people with learning disabilities and mental health issues. In particular, 142 Peats Hill, which has, although it's remained at requires improvement, what is very concerning to me is the fact that the leadership of that is being classed as inadequate, according to CQC. I did read the report. And the other one that also concerns me is 246 Haymills, where two residents sustained injuries, and it's not necessarily clear what those injuries were. And their CQC rating in less than 6 months has dropped from good to requires improvement. I just wonder what we're going to do, if anything, about.
I'll bring Councillor Conti in. I'll take them in threes.
One was sort of similar to Alan's point about the require improvement care homes, but looking at the chart, there isn't much change in the percentage in terms of the number of care homes that are rated require improvement. And in terms of, are they across the months, are they the same care homes just staying at that same level? Or are we seeing ones that are requiring improvement, improving, and other ones falling down? And if it's sort of a consistent trend of the same care homes time and time again, how is that managed? I think when you look at the reasons that some of them, there's quite a lot of them are safeguarding reasons. That sounds obviously quite concerning, that they're required improvement, they're not providing or because they're failing on safeguarding. So just wondering how is that managed? How are we ensuring that residents who are placed there are being looked after and are safe?
And then if I can just add a question along the same theme. In particular, I was looking at the CQC ratings, as you would imagine, somebody that works in healthcare regulation, for older adults and dementia care homes, and nearly half of ours in the borough require improvement. And I just wondered, Kerry, if you could talk a bit about the themes that have arisen from those, whether there's any similarities, and what work we're doing as well to in partnership with those to drive up standards.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the questions. Some of these are very similar answers. So is it okay if I sort of talk through some of our position in terms of what we're doing as a system? And again, a lot of this has been through strong partnership work. So the biggest driver for quality of care home provision is the manager. I think that's accepted through CQC, it's accepted through our commissioners and our engagement with the market. The average length of stay for a registered manager in a care home in Ealing has been 6 months. So you can imagine new registered managers starting, not having long enough to change the system and to change the practice in the home, and another manager starts. As a result of that being an issue that we're very conscious of within Ealing, again, through the Joint Investment Fund, through health and social care funding, a new training programme has been implemented specifically targeted at care home managers to support them in their role, to understand their statutory functions under CQC, and hopefully encourage them to stay within Ealing for longer and stay within the registered care home longer. That was one of the number of actions that came from the Care Home Summit that I mentioned earlier, that we had multi-organisation meeting, looking at areas of work, and through that programme, so we've developed additional training for care home managers, continued strong work in terms of the joint operational group, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of how we use data to target resources and support to care homes, and a specific piece of work that Neha and colleagues have been working on around supporting care homes with more challenging individuals with behavioural difficulties, and how we can support care homes manage some of the more complex cases that exist within their populations. The challenges and specific issues that Alan's raised with regard to specific providers, if that's okay, Alan, can I deal with that with you outside rather than here in an open space? We're very conscious that there looks to be a differential between the residential and nursing homes for older adults and adults of working age. We think that's a product of market behaviours. I think that's reflected in London and also more widely nationally. The targeted work around how we engage with older adult care homes, I think, is absolutely key to the safety and stability for people in those homes, but also for the sector as a whole, going back to Charlene's earlier question about managing of the care homes. The question with regard, I'm sorry, I'm going a bit all around the houses in terms of the questions. The questions with regard to some providers staying in requires improvement for a long time is something that we're very conscious of. We have 4 care homes that are under the PFI within the council. All 4 went into requires improvement last calendar year, and they provide I think it's just over 30% of the total beds in the borough, and there is a very targeted piece of work on all those providers, individual homes, move back into good through targeted interventions, and a lot of work with Health Watch. You carried out enter and view processes within those homes. So we know that the targeted work can support homes improve in terms of their CQC rating, but we've got a lot to target, if that makes sense, and it's prioritising that limited resource to support the sector improve. Hopefully that's covered the 3 areas.
Yeah, I think that's helpful, Kerry, and it might be that the specific questions about individual providers you want to take offline out of the meeting and have a conversation with Alan. Councillor Conti.
So a follow-up point, really. For those care homes that are continuously in the requirement improvement band, obviously you spoke at the start about we have sort of an excess number of beds in the borough, and I think you said the 3rd highest in London. Do we ever say, well, we're not going to place any more residents at your care home? Do we do that? Because clearly, obviously, that's would that be an incentive for them to do something more? Those care homes do something more in order to improve.
It's a really excellent point. So, in terms of the 2 areas of the market that we manage, we will only buy new services for people in receipt of domiciliary care from good and outstanding providers, because we've got a much more dynamic market and it's much more fluid, and therefore the market quality has improved significantly as a result of that intervention. And others within care homes, because it's static resource, it's harder to say we'll only procure from good and outstanding. However, in terms of the provider concerns process, I run a monthly risk panel where we review the quality of providers, and our interventions go through a number of stages in terms of engagement support, suspension of new placements, which I make the decision as the statutory director. We then inform other boroughs to suspend placements to the provider, and then the final position is that we say we're going to decommission and move individuals from that home. where there are significant concerns. We always have to take into account the risk of a move. If somebody's been living in a care home and they're very vulnerable, especially older adults, to move them to a new placement carries risk, and we have to balance that risk out with the quality of the offer in the home. But we do take those decisions, and I've taken them on a number of occasions in my relatively short period in Ealing.
Thanks. I'll take another round of questions. I can see Councillor Steed indicating online.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, just pursuing this point, perhaps rather tediously as far as Kerry's concerned, but it is a worry that 44% of our care homes are requiring improvement. Can I use one of my favourite reference points here about benchmarking? I mean, how does that compare to other boroughs? It clearly isn't an acceptable percentage, but as I say, are other boroughs in the same situation? And I also accept and acknowledge the huge problems within the whole sector. I'm not ignoring those, but it's still a worrying figure, I think. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Steed. Other questions from panel members? We'll come at you with that one then, Kerry, if that's okay.
So I don't know the benchmarking data off the top of my head, Councillor Steve, but it's an absolutely valid question, and I shall gather that information and share it with the members of this committee at the soonest opportunity. I agree with you completely in terms of the dissatisfaction in terms of the quality of some providers in the market in Ealing, but I think as a system, we're working very closely to try and rebalance that and improve the quality of the offer within the borough. It is that the market position is exacerbated in terms of our influence in the market, in terms of, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of our influence on the domiciliary care market, because we're one of the biggest procurers by a long shot in terms of domiciliary care, even compared to self-funders. We can have significant and relatively quick impacts in the quality of the offer because we procure, I think it's just under 50% of the total beds within the borough. Our influence is limited, and that's why it's so important that we work closely with NHS colleagues, with North West London colleagues and other partners, including CQC, to improve the offers where possible. But certainly I'll go away and get the comparative data as soon as possible.
That'd be really helpful. Thank you. Further questions from panel members, colleagues? I think that's it for this item. Oh, sorry, Dr. Taylor.
Just following on what Kerry says around the benchmarking. The problem with benchmarking when it comes to care homes, particularly in terms of CQC rating, it really does depend on the number of care homes in the borough. If you've got care homes which only have one or two care homes, the swing in terms of the percentage shift will be quite significant if they move down from good to requires improvement. So we just have to be mindful when you're trying to do benchmarking for care homes that you are actually comparing like with like. So that's just a warning on around that.
That's helpful, Kerry. I'll come to you.
I agree completely with Dr. Taylor's point, and I think that the size of the care home market in Ealing is inordinately challenging. And I think the work, and I forgot to mention earlier, the work of the Argyll Surgery and the tax team and how they engage with the wider organisations and partnerships is absolutely key to how we're responding to challenges now within this complex market environment, but also the response during COVID and the containment of the impact of COVID within a very diverse marketplace in the borough.
Thanks very much. I think that brings this item to a conclusion. I just wanted to say, in sort of summing up, we are hopeful that that we can use this as a regular sort of item on the agenda to look at quality assurance, not only in terms of social care, but the wider health service and how it's operating in Ealing. So our aspiration is to pull together a borough-based partnership systems performance framework, which would look at the performance and outcomes, quality and finances of the whole system. So hopefully when this item returns to the panel, we'll be looking at services in a more holistic way. But that was a really helpful discussion. A couple of actions as well stemming from it in terms of the benchmarking information which Kerry's agreed to provide, and also that conversation with Alan on the particular providers and the concerns that he raised as well. So thank you very much. We are slightly ahead of schedule, you'll be pleased to know, but we're moving now with plenty of time this time, Neha, to the Access to Primary Care in Ealing report. For colleagues at home, Neha, and in the room, Neha's the Borough Director for the NHS in North West London, and you're here today with Dr. Taylor as well, the Medical Director, to give us an overview of an update on accessing primary care. I think you circulated a 35-slide pack, but I think you're only going to pull out a few of those key slides for us. We've slipped into this agenda item an update from Anna Bryden on the autumn COVID-19 vaccination rollout. So we'll hear from Neha, from Dr. Taylor, and then we'll bring in Anna on the COVID-19 side of things as well. So Neha, over to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen if this works. I'm hoping everybody can see those slides. Great. So this is a very detailed pack, but I will not be going through all of it. I want to pull out some key things that key messages in particular about the.
Do you just want to pop it on slideshow? Sorry, just so that everyone can see it. Ah, lovely. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. So there are just a few things I really want to pick out. So we are one of the largest boroughs in London with and across Northwest London in particular. We are the largest, and our health services respond to and provide the care for those patients registered with a GP practice, not only those that are resident in the borough. We now have 69 practices across the borough. There may be a few more sites than that because of branch surgeries, but we have had to close another 2 practices in the last 9 months. And there are reasons around that behind the landlords selling on and the GPs retiring from those practices. But we've managed, there were small practices in premises that were not really fit for purpose for the future, and they've been absorbed. Those patients have been re-registered in other practices around the borough. Just very high level, very recently, so 1st of July this year, the ICB as a whole, so that's across Northwest London, the Integrated Care Board, took on the responsibility for delegated commissioning of pharmacies, general optometry and dental primary care, dental primary services, as well as secondary and community services for dentistry as well. And we've, across Northwest London, we've taken over 1,090 contracts, but it's really important to know that actually, as we're working across the whole of Northwest London, actually, we've had a discussion across London. There was a team of about 25 people who are responsible for doing the day-to-day commissioning and contracting functions for all of these contracts across the whole of London. And we've decided to just keep that team in one unit, and they're hosted by North East London ICB. But for Northwest London, they work with us. And this slide just gives you a bit of information about the number of contracts we have. We're at a very early stage in understanding the role and how the contract is established and what we can do differently with each of those contracts for the future to try and really improve services. So we're at a very early stage and started meeting with the local dental committee very recently. However, with the pharmacies, the local authority, the public health team have refreshed the pharmaceutical needs assessment which can be found on the council website, and there's a link to that there, and that's got a really detailed, thorough review of the pharmaceutical landscape that we have in Ealing. So I'm just going to skip on. So in terms of workforce, and part of my responses last time, workforce is a key part of access. So if we don't have enough workforce, and just like Kerry was reflecting around social care, workforce in general practice and across the health services can be really challenged. And we are very actively managing and monitoring the number of GPs and nurses, but also other clinicians that are facing patients and providing care to patients to give the GP practices the resilience and the ability to cope with the growth that there is. We're keeping a really close eye on it. And as you can see, we've had an increase since March of 1.7 whole-time equivalents, that's what WTE stands for, of GPs, but a decrease in nursing. So we have a big workforce piece of work happening across the system, but it's a long journey to really see the impact, a positive impact on workforce. And this slide just gives you some of the additional roles which I've spoken about in the past that are now part of the primary care workforce providing frontline care. So I'm just going to move on. So everybody will remember that in Ealing, quite a few years ago, we started something called the Ealing Standard. And the Ealing Standard had a suite of services. Before that, every practice could pick and choose which services out of a suite of enhanced services they could deliver, and that created inequity between the GP practices. When we launched the Ealing Standard quite a few years ago, the idea was to level up the funding, but also ensure that every practice was delivering all of the services. And if they weren't delivering the service themselves, that there was a practice close by that could deliver that service on their behalf. And that was a really big success and a big part of our resilience planning for general practice. That has now turned into a North West London wide set of enhanced services. So there are a big chunk of services that are absolutely consistent, delivered across every single practice across North West London. So really delivering population health. And then we've got some locally derived services based on the needs of the local population. The other change is we were commissioning the Ealing Standard at individual practice level. We're now commissioning that contract as a whole primary care network. So that's a group of practices working together in a network. And that gives them a way of trying to share expertise, resource across their network, and they deliver that and manage the demand and the capacity based on that. But the idea is to equalise the investment across all of the boroughs across North West London, a bit like we were talking for the Better Care Fund, and where there has been underfunding, bring that up. So I'm just going to move us on around patient feedback. So the GP survey was published on the 13th of July. And as you will see from the questions that we've picked out here, there has been a slight improvement on a number of the indicators, but also areas of improvement to still make. And there is variation. And when you go through all of the questions across our 69 practices, there is variation between them. And it's not necessarily linked to size of the practice or where it is or the population it serves, but it just varies on how each practice is delivering services, which tells us there is a lot more work still to do to improve outcomes, which is where our part of our information comes on about what we need to do next in terms of improving access in primary care. So the main part of this conversation is around access, and there are three different components to that. There is the work that we've done around the access standard in Ealing, which is much more of a local specification to try and increase the number of appointments that are available to our population. Right now, 71% of appointments are face-to-face, not all with GPs, but it could be a range of different clinicians. But and that is higher, slightly higher than the average across Northwest London, which is around 67%. So we're really pleased with that, and there are processes in place where a practice sometimes has a conversation with a patient or looks at an online consultation and then says, actually, we need to call you in for a face-to-face appointment, and that's what gets followed through. So there is a local delivery of access. There's been a national real push around access recovery, looking at these parts of the system. So when you say empowering patients, that's self-referral pathways, accessing, booking appointments directly, ordering repeat prescriptions themselves where it's appropriate, being able to get oral contraception from a pharmacy and programs like that. There's a program on modernizing general practice, so which is about moving to digital telephony, and we have 68 of our 69 practices are now on cloud-based telephony, and the 69th is being supported to move to cloud-based telephony. And what that does is it increases the number of lines you have into and out of the practice, which stops patients then waiting in an endless queue. Or there may be queues still, but it's a better system than the analog system that was in place, but also allows for callback technology. Then there is something about the workforce and building the capacity, as I've talked about already, and then trying to reduce the bureaucracy so that practices can really focus in on the care. One of the other elements is about capacity and access improvement plans. So linked to that other slide, each primary care network has developed their own plans about how they're going to improve access based on the needs of their local population, having conversations with their PPG groups and other groups and their own staff as well to say what they're going to do to try and improve. And we're monitoring those improvement plans across Northwest London. We also deliver, general practice also delivers enhanced access outside of clinical hours, outside of the core hours of 8 to 6:30. These are in the evenings and on Saturdays in particular. Last year, they were also delivering that care on the Sundays, and the funding and the contracting nationally has changed. So it's now delivering on Saturdays from 9 to 5 and every evening. So there may be a bit of a variation between the delivery at each PCN level, but that is there. And that delivers a total of an additional 440 plus hours per week across Ealing. And that's delivered by a range of different practices. So just last tiny bit that I was going to mention was around future working. And I think it's mentioned in Kerry's report earlier about integrated neighbourhood teams and working in a different way in the future across in the community to make sure all parts of the system are working together to deliver the needs of the population. So that's mental health, community, the general practice workforce, the social care in the future, sort of working as integrated neighbourhood teams, much more focused on the needs of the local population. And this slide just sort of summarises a bit of the work that's been happening to date. Happy to take questions or move on to the vaccination defence.
Thanks. I think what we'll do is we will have Anna's update, and then we'll take questions to both you and Anna. So Anna, I know you are having issues with your camera. Don't worry if they're still continuing, but so long as we can hear you, that would be wonderful.
Evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you, Anna. Thanks.
Apologies for the video. It's been on Zoom all day and it's been working, so it just doesn't like this evening for some reason. Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Neha. I was just going to really give a bit of an introduction to the new COVID variant and just where we're up to with our understanding of that. And then I think Neha's going to talk us through the slides in terms of the delivery of the vaccination programme during the autumn. So just a couple of brief points from me. So as outlined in the slides, a new variant, a new subvariant of Omicron was identified recently. It's been found in a number of countries, and it's been found across a number of regions in the UK. So it's thought to be quite widely spread, although we obviously don't have the very, very large surveillance programs that we used to have. This was found at a time when we had a background of an increase in cases generally, not massive, not a big surge, but definitely an upward trend. There were quite a lot of mutations found on the subvariant, so some initial concern and uncertainty, and that resulted in the decision to bring forward the vaccination programme from a from a cautious point of view to ensure as much protection for vulnerable residents as much as possible at this stage in the year. There are some very, very early findings starting to come through from the research on the variant. None of those are showing evidence for particularly serious concern at the moment in terms of how easy it is to pass on, how severely unwell people get with it, or how effective the vaccines are if they've had them before. It's early days though, more research is being done, but at the moment it's a case of watch and see. There are two key messages really I just wanted to share with the committee. I think the first one is really to encourage vaccination as much as you can. We've got a number of messages out there, out to our local residents, out to care homes. We're sharing some messages further with some local partners like schools and GP practices. I think we're planning that just in terms of, I think a lot of places, a lot of our learning previously in COVID is if you don't hear anything, people start to panic a bit if all they're seeing is media releases. So really just putting out some of the vaccination information. The other side of it is really about re-emphasising the importance of the current guidance. There are no plans at the moment to change any of the national guidance about testing, masks, anything like that. So it really is for each organisation to really go back and re-emphasise, re-look at what that current guidance is saying. So, for example, some of the infection control measures, really good hand washing, asking people not to visit relatives in care homes if they're feeling unwell, things like that. So they're the two key messages. Happy to hand over to Neha now to go through how the programme's being delivered in Ealing over autumn, and then happy to take any questions later. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Anna. That was really helpful. And just to underscore the importance, I think if people have been invited to get boosters, they should absolutely do that. Neha, can I pass over to you for a bit more of the detail, and then we'll open up to questions?
Sure. Thank you. So this is just some of the same information that Anna's just described, but just to bring out the date, we've started the programme sort of was brought forward to the 11th of September for both flu and COVID, and people will be called earlier on than they would have done in previous years as well. We started as a system working out how we're going to vaccinate all of our residents in care homes who consent, and those that are housebound in particular as being really vulnerable. Sorry, that's not COVID, that's just the back end of a cold. But trying to do them as early as possible and by 22nd of October. And the way we're doing that, I'll explain in a moment. But we also have the national booking system is up and running, and people can, who are eligible, go and book a vaccine via the national booking system. And flu is being offered as soon as possible, and for care homes it will start very soon. These are the eligible cohorts that can get the COVID vaccine. Flu cohorts were confirmed before it for autumn, and you can find more information about the eligible cohorts through the Green Book. It's called the Green Book, and chapter 14A of that Green Book, which you can find the link of here. So just some final slide of just some highlights of where we've got so far. The eligible population is about 150,000, just under 150,000, based on the cohorts we've just talked about. And we have enough capacity in the system in various settings for 13,910 every week. That is not all being used up at the moment. And we have the ability to step that up even more if in case of a surge scenario. So far, 6,400 as of the date that when I got this 2 days ago have been vaccinated so far. And that includes 324 people in care homes, that's patients and staff in our care homes. So we're trying to really push that program forward. The number of pharmacies will be increasing. The number of pharmacies already on the national booking system, but there will be a number of pharmacies increasing, and they're going through a final approval process, and they'll be announced as soon as possible. We have one primary care network that is in Northolt that is delivering COVID vaccinations themselves, and they are also going to be doing that for their housebound patients as well. We have a North West London roving team who are working across the whole of North West London, but they're based here in Ealing as CP House. And they are supporting the delivery of the housebound and care homes vaccination programme. CP House will also continue to deliver the walk-ins on Wednesdays, Thursdays and Fridays from the 20th of September. So it's already started. And we've been working with Ealing Community Transport to see how they can support, as they did during the vaccination programme earlier on, about how they can support to get patients to the right places for vaccination. And as soon as possible, and wherever possible, co-administration of the vaccinations is will be offered or has been offered. And that was a full update.
Thanks, Neha. And just to say that Anna Bryden's very helpfully put a table in the chat function about eligibility. And Anna, I just wonder if you might circulate that to all of the members of the panel, because it would be good to access that resource. I'll take questions now. I can see Councillor Crawford, Councillor Conti, and then I'll take others as well.
So I'm going to talk from a local perspective of Acton, North Acton, and there is, I mean, you sound as if it does sound as if there is good news accessing GP appointments elsewhere, but in North Acton it is quite serious, and it's understandable because of all those large developments. And and initially, I think one of the problems when people are accessing a GP is they're asked by a receptionist, are you urgent? Do you have an urgent requirement? And a lot of people think, well, it's not urgent. I might be in pain or whatever, but there needs to be more education on what they mean by urgent. And so if they're not urgent, they're having to wait a month. And my constituents are then seeing cancellations. And then there has to be some extra intervention to get an appointment. So there are real issues there. And the other thing is that I'd be curious to know what relationship you have with the mayors, with the OPDC. Because at a fairly recent planning meeting, there were questions about where the health contribution was going, and it was going wholeheartedly to very good to a hospital, which wasn't in the borough of Ealing, though it was probably fairly close. But the question was, what do you understand with the need for the GPs? Because we've had one closure, and the planner didn't know the situation, and that really worried me because there are a lot of developments coming, and I think in the pipeline there is actually going to be a new GP service in Portal Way. So I would just respectfully like to ask you to perhaps take an interest with what the OPDC and do your best for Ealing. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Crawford, a really powerful question there. Councillor Conti and then Councillor Dinser.
Thank you. My first one isn't really a question, but I just thought it was really good to see about that you're looking at allowing optometrists to do direct referrals to ophthalmology. I just think it was an unnecessary sort of delay in the system, having an optician letter just to write one line saying, please see attached from the optician in order to refer someone. So I think that's really good progress. Two main points really that I wanted to make. One was about allied health professionals. Obviously, there's an expanding or ever expanding list of allied health professionals. And one of my concerns is that often sometimes patients don't know who they're seeing. So are they seeing a GP? Are they seeing a physician associate who's only had 24 months of training before they're seeing patients? And I think that is a problem. I was talking to a resident at the end of a resident meeting about 2 or 3 weeks ago who had a suspected skin cancer, thought they were going to see a GP, saw a physician associate, told them it was an ingrowing hair, wasn't happy, went back, and then ended up seeing a GP the second time and ended up being referred under the 2-week wait. If the patient had known they weren't seeing a GP, they would have felt much more confident in challenging that person, actually, can I have another opinion, etc. And I think sometimes when receptionists use phrases like clinician, patients, for them, that's just an enigma. What does that mean? Who are they seeing? And I think it's really, really important that patients know who they're going to see, and receptionists are really clear about that at the point of booking, because otherwise they may think they're seeing someone who has had a lot more training than they have. And that's not anything to sort of disregard the work of physician assistants or associates. They do an important job if they work within their remit with supervision and doing the right sort of scope of work. But if they're being used in particular to fill the job of a GP and patients aren't aware of that, then I think that's a big problem. The second point I want to make was about appointments. I raised this when we spoke about this before Christmas last year, so it's almost 12 months on, but there are still practices in the borough who you have to fill out an online sort of online form in order to be triaged, and then you get called at any time that working day with no appointment. And if you miss your appointment or your call, that's it. You may be at work, etc. Then you have to go through the whole thing again the next day. I know a particular practice who does that, who's still near the bottom of that satisfaction. And 12 months on, nothing's changed. They still operate in that way. I know, obviously, practices to a level have freedom about how they operate their appointments. There's only a limit of what you can do. But how can, what can be done with practices who, 3.5 years on from the peak of the pandemic are still operating this way? Because it's not right for patients. They're not providing the right service. And it doesn't seem to be improving. And then my final point is just about PCNs at scale. I think clearly that's an important model in terms of how we ensure access and get people appointments. One of the things that there is a risk with that about continuity of care. So I think there was an article in the BMJ a while ago about how continuity of care, seeing the same professional regularly, reduces morbidity, reduces your frequency of you visiting or having access to healthcare. So in the long term, is really important. Sometimes by upscaling things, you're more likely not to have that continuity. So how do we find that balance?
Thanks, Councillor Conti and Councillor Dinser.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure whether my question falls under this remit, but I'm going to try anyway. I was doing a rodeo show and a number of callers informed me that their GPs are not prescribing certain medicines for them, like eye drops, vitamin D, E45 creams. Is there a reason for it? Because all of these people who called, they were pensioners, so they are entitled to free prescription and free medicine as a result. So is there any instructions that are gone out to GPs not to prescribe these, or is there a reason? I'm simply seeking clarity what's happening, because I'll be going to the radio station again soon, so want to know the answer.
Thanks, Councillor. Neha, I'll pass over to you. I think we've got a range of themes there, capacity, appointments, specific medications as well. So over to you.
So for some of them, I'm actually going to pass over to Dr. Taylor, but there's two in particular that I wanted to answer. One was the OPDC one. I think it's a really, really important one. We've now started a conversation with the NHS England's London team that are really working closely with the mayor's team around the need in that area. And with the developments going up, we're also being asked saying, okay, if we can give you a contribution, where would you want to put that? At the moment, there aren't any GP practices on site. There is a plan for, I think it's Imperial, to take one of the sites to then build a health centre, but that is quite a few years out. So what we do need to do is ensure that whilst that is still in the planning, that we have enough capacity in the local area to be able to cope with the growth. And we are actually meeting across colleagues in Brent, Hammersmith and Fulham and Ealing, because it sort of covers that whole patch, to do some planning and thinking about where we can increase capacity now close by in order for to cope with that growth ahead of that health centre then coming in place. One of the things that we've been looking at is, so when we say that some of the money is going to one of the trusts, actually there is a GP practice within Central Middlesex Hospital, which is in that area, very, very close by. And one of the things that we've been talking about is increasing the capacity at that GP practice. And then we're looking at all of the other practices in the area across all 3 boroughs. And we're doing some planning meetings next week. So it's very, very live. And we've got monthly conversations going on about this, but this is going to be a long-term piece. So I absolutely acknowledge and recognize that risk. Yeah, it's not going to be very soon that you're going to see any updates, but absolutely, as soon as there are, I'm happy to bring them to this group. And then the other one is about the practice that is still working in that way. Outside of this, I'd really like to know which practice it is, to be honest, so that we can then do some very targeted work, because access is a really important part of all of the work that we're doing. And if that still hasn't changed, we need to pick that up at an individual level. Thank you. And I'll hand over to Vijay, if that's all right.
Yeah. So just pick on some of the other questions. So one of the questions around reception is in terms of what is the role of receptionists, and particularly in terms of managing the demand that comes into primary care. As you all know, receptionists play a crucial role in general practice in terms of how they conduct themselves, particularly in relation to getting some level of initial triage and screening as to what is the complaint that the patient is complaining about, and try and understand the level of urgency on that. And NHS England have developed their access to modern general practice, and that talks very much around having a robust triage system to enable you to manage your demand in general practice using all modalities of access. And online consultation is just one modality of access. Telephone is another one, as well as video. So it's important that receptionists have the right training, and we have rolled out significant amount of training, particularly in terms of customer relationships and customer service for our receptionists through our training hub over the last couple of years. And we continue to do that, and we will, but we also have to strive that and ensure that the demand is appropriately managed, and it needs to reflect not only the patient's choice, but also the clinical need as well. And that's the balance that general practice on a daily basis tries to manage. With relation to the optometry, absolutely, that this was one of the key parts of our new pathway around optometry across Northwest London, and we have developed that in the spec to ensure that optometrists are able to refer directly to eye services rather than having to go back to the GP to do a referral letter. I think you're absolutely right around the allied health professionals, particularly in terms of identifying who they are, what their role is, and that's absolutely vital. And there have been circumstances like the one you described. There's been some in the media about patients not knowing exactly who they're seeing, what is their role, what is their competency. So we will take that back, particularly in relation to putting some principles down in our Ealing bulletin, just to remind practices that it's important that those professionals do actually identify themselves. Physicians associates, do play a crucial role. They are graduates in life science who do a 2-year intensive course in healthcare, and they will continue to play a crucial role. In Ealing, we have 14 physicians associates at present, and with the expansion of the ARS roles and expansion of primary care workforce, they are going to play an even more active role. However, it's important they have good clinical supervision from a senior GP within the environment that they work in. They are actually part of the professional body of the Royal College of Physicians. They have their own faculty now, the Faculty of Physicians Associates. So, this is the direction of travel. They are here to provide additional support to GPs because, as we all know, GPs are unable to deal with all of the issues that patients are presenting with. We have to work in a much more integrated way with an expanded workforce to meet the needs of the populations. And I think I absolutely agree to your point in terms of identification of who you actually are seeing. With respect to appointments, particularly in relation to what we're trying to do in North West London as well as NHS England. NHS England have developed a access recovery program primarily around the experiences that patients are experiencing. We are trying to get away from that 8 a.m. rush where every patient has to ring at 8 o'clock. And if they don't ring at 8 o'clock, then they're not going to get an appointment and they've got to try the next day. So a significant amount of investment has been put back into primary care to look at that. And as Neha has said in the slides, each of our PCNs have produced a capacity and access plan to try and mitigate some of that 8 a.m. rush. And we will be holding the PCNs to account for those access plans when it comes to the end of this financial year to ensure that they deliver on that and they improve the patient experience. And that's going to be so important. On top of that, Northwest London, we have produced a access at scale program. We have our first wave, and in that first wave, we've got 6 PCN cohorts. And the idea around this is to really look at how we can support general practice with the daily demand of that low complexity need. So I absolutely appreciate that continuity has degraded over a number of years in general practice. There is, because there's so many different types of reactive access and continuity has diminished. However, what is important, if we can have a way of supporting primary care with that low complexity need at scale, that will allow the primary care workforce at an individual practice level to really concentrate on those individuals that absolutely require continuity care, long-term disease management, complex patients. And that's the whole purpose of that access at scale program. And then the final question was around prescribing, particularly for E45, dry eyes, vitamin D. As you know, the NHS and each ICB has a definitive pot of money, and the prescribing budget is limited across every ICB in England, and we have to try and work within our means. So the ICB do look at those low clinical value medications that are currently prescribed in NHS, and really trying to see whether individuals can actually get by these over the counter. Dry eyes, for instance, lubricants, they're not expensive drugs. They are cheap drugs that are potentially affordable. Yes, there are some individuals who are unable to afford their dry eye medication or unable to afford their E45 for their dry skin. And primary care and individual GPs, individual clinicians will make that discretion around that. But overall, we are trying to ensure that within the NHS, we do try and be mindful about the NHS funds, the prescribing budget that we have, and we try and maintain that level of budget in terms of how we manage the needs of the population.
Thanks very much. So I think there were some actions stemming from those immediate questions in terms of an update for Councillor Crawford, particularly on the planning and the capacity. I think Councillor Conti is going to share some specific concerns about a particular provider. And I do think it would be helpful for Councillor Dinser to have a particular, appreciate you won't have all the details to hand, Dr. Taylor, but a specific response on those particular medications that he listed. I do think on the issue that Councillor Conti raised about receptionists, we might need to think further than just the bulletin with information going out to them about various clinicians identifying themselves. I think there's got to be more that we can do to improve the visibility within surgeries, because it is something that's come up through my residence in Pitshanger as well. So it'd be good if we could think more about that. Very conscious that we have two members of the public that have been waiting for 1 hour and 40 to ask questions. Could I invite Eve and Martin to talk on behalf of Ealing Save Our NHS? You've got a couple of questions to pose. Now, could I just ask whether, Chris Hilton, you could just allow Eve to use that microphone there? I'm just mindful. Now, nobody's debating that, Eve. Yeah. And it's just...
right, thanks very much.
It's just those people online won't be able to hear you otherwise.
We'll get to sit in your seat, Chris. Sorry, yes, Councillor Conti pretty much asked my question, which was about physician associates. And I know that the BMA published a statement, I think it was last week, expressing their concerns. And I think one of the issues is that for a member of the public, they don't understand if you use the word physician associate, they think that, a GP is a physician. So how is somebody supposed to know the difference between someone that's associate and someone who is not? And I believe that the BMA has suggested that the name should be changed to suggest physician's assistant, which I think most members of the public would understand, but clearly that's beyond anybody here to sort of deal with. I noticed Hitesh, that you talked about some sort of bulletin going out to the public, but I think you need something a bit stronger than that to explain to people that this isn't a GP. I'm not quite sure what would the best way. Maybe people should, I know it's not nice to ask people to wear name badges, but I think it should be absolutely clear that you know who you are seeing. And I live in Southall, and I can imagine that it's even greater confusion for someone like Southall who, very much respect and look up to GPs. And so if someone who they think is a GP says it's so, it's so. So I do think there's an equality issue here as well. So I think that really needs to be addressed. And is it possible for it to be part of your Ealing standard? I don't know, but maybe to look at how that could be done. My second question is about access to dentistry. It's something we've talked about a lot in our campaign. Certainly, welcome what was written on the slide. There was only one slide on it because it's very early days about promoting oral health. I mean, absolutely, that definitely needs to be done. We come across lots of people who have very little information, new mums and things like that. But the problem is that it has to be backed up by people being able to access an NHS dentist. And it's not just Ealing, it's just a huge crisis in terms of access. And I'm not suggesting in any way that you can resolve this in Ealing, and of course, lack of access just exacerbates health inequalities. Poor people can't afford to go private. It worsens quality of life. And of course, there's all sorts of health conditions that get picked up by dentists, which means that they present much later on in the day with really severe illnesses, whether it's at the GP or whether it's in a hospital. So I was going to ask whether you've considered any kind of review of the availability of NHS dentists within our area, and if not, could we ask that this be addressed as soon as possible? Because clearly we need to know. I mean, I know my own practice has stopped taking new patients, and I'm sure that must be all over the place. So I'll stop there anyway. So thank you for.
Thanks, Eve. We'll take a couple more questions from panel members if there are any. Alan.
Yeah, it's concerning the GP survey, patient survey. And when you look at it, there's the 5 categories. It's not necessarily noticeable, but if you look at the one that is the top and one that comes quite close to the bottom in all 5 of those graphs, actually they are within the same primary care network of North Southall. And I wonder, why is it that the top one is working so well and the bottom one isn't? What's going to be done to address that? And the other thing that's also interesting is when you look at the access by phone, can you get through? How satisfied are you? And the average for the bottom 4 is around about 38%. Now, what's very interesting is those same providers, if you look back to 2010, there was a particular scrutiny panel that dealt with GP access, and the results then, the same practices, was on average 63%. So we're actually looking at a reduced access. This may be due to more members of the public having to get through, but I just wondered, and it's, if you look at it, it's not the fact that, yes, you'll turn around and say, well, we're getting a new phone system, but these surveys were taken before that system came into being.
Thank you. Martin, I think you had a point that you wanted to raise as well, which
if I may briefly,
just if you could use the microphone.
oh, I've got a loud voice too.
Well, I don't think people at home will be able to hear you, however loud you speak, if you don't use it.
That one.
Oh, okay. Eva's covered the points very well, and I wholly support the points that that Councillor Conti has made. You know, he's absolutely spot on with that. But I just wanted to add a couple of issues. I think the point about supervision by a doctor, when we're talking about, by the way, I've just learned something. I didn't know that physician associates were qualified. And you know, I've been referred to somebody called a social prescriber. I don't know if he was qualified or not, but to be honest, I wasn't too impressed, you know, with his abilities in that particular case. He seemed more of an administrator, frankly, than a medical person. That was a personal experience. So I think the issue of continuity of care is linked to the issue of a supervision by a doctor. And that really needs to be looked into, that there is a, rather as a GP might refer you to a hospital, which that's why I'm wearing a hat, by the way, skin issues on my head. You know, the GP will refer you to a hospital doctor, and that will follow. I think possibly something similar ought to be considered in regard to these physician associates and other staff who are not doctors and who are not nurses, excuse me, and who are not nurses. I support the issue of dentistry as well. I have noticed, because I go to a dentist in Hanwell regularly, but I have noticed that if you don't buy something from them on the private side, they're not very interested in the NHS side. And you know, I've got a good pension, but a lot of people haven't. And I think, you know, I really think that the panel should look into the question of dentistry and the provision of NHS dentistry in particular. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Martin. I'm going to take those questions first, and then we've got Carleen and Councillor Nagpal, and then I've got a question for Anna on the COVID side of things too. So I'll take those 3. But before I do, just to answer Martin's question directly, dentistry is on the agenda for this panel in our March meeting. When is it? We are looking at it again in more detail. We've sort of slipped it into Neha's update today, but I think there'll be more to follow on that, because it is a concern for residents. So Neha and Dr. Taylor.
So I'll let Dr. Taylor answer most of the questions, but there was just 1 or 2 around. So social prescriber is not a clinician, so they are a non-clinician helping an individual with their own circumstances, trying to think outside of the box and not just the medical support, but that doesn't stop the medical and clinical support that then provided. It's an additional bit of support. And I think you make some really good points, Alan, around the survey And I think some of it is linked to the sheer volume of increase. And this is my real concern around the borough, that the population is growing and the workforce, and that's why I make such a point of pulling out the workforce, because if we don't have a good, strong workforce plan and the workforce coming in, we are really going to struggle. So it is all very linked. And the variation between the PCN of the highest performing and the lowest performing, that makes the point exactly. Every single practice is so different. So we have to do work at an individual practice level. We have to understand where it's really good practice and why, and what can be replicated in another practice. But there are limitations with what you can do. And we've got 69 practices who are really quite stretched with everything that they're doing. So a lot of the programs around trying to put in support and targeted improvement plans is why we're sort of moving in that we've been doing that work.
Just going back on to regarding the dentistry. So for us, as you know, this is new ground for us. It's, previously the commissioners were NHS England. However, saying that, Nair and I have started that engagement with the local dental committee. We've had a couple of meetings with the local clinical dentist director of the local dental committee, trying to identify some of the issues, and you've highlighted some of the issues, particularly around access to NHS dentists. Part of the problem around NHS dentistry is the way that they deliver the care. Unlike primary care, where you have a patient list size and a catchment area, NHS dentists don't work that way. So our NHS dentists in Ealing will also be serving NHS patients outside of Ealing as well, because they have no geographical catchment or boundary to work in. And that may be something that going forward in the future, do we perhaps need to consider having a model like we have for general practice, have that for NHS dentistry. Only today in our North West London Primary Care Board, we have asked the North West London Local Dental Committee to present a paper to the Primary Care Board, highlighting all of the issues around NHS dentistry, so we can start to address those. But it is going to take time. We are not going to be able to turn this around in the next 6 months, even in the next year. This is going to take us, it's a several year change to try and improve NHS dentistry. One of the other issues around NHS dentistry, which I wasn't aware of until we started having these meetings, is that NHS dentistry, there's a cap on their activity. So on the NHS. So again, that has a direct impact on the level of access that they can offer. So that, yeah, I wasn't aware of that until recently. So there is a lot to do in terms of how we manage dentistry going forward, but we know we are starting that process now. Going back to the health professional role, I failed to say earlier on, we have started that We Are General Practice campaign, and that campaign is about identifying and explaining and raising awareness to the public around the extended primary care workforce, who they are, what is their role, how do they support GPs. So we've started that campaign, but you're absolutely right, we do need to do more in terms of making sure there is total transparency in terms of when an individual sees another, I'm going to call him a clinician for now, sees another clinician in a practice, in terms of what is their role, what is their responsibility, what is their level of competency in terms of how they manage and interact with that patient. And then finally, Alan, in terms of what you described in North-South, where you've got the two polarized experiences, that is exactly what the capacity and access plans that each of these PCNs develop. One key area around that is the patient experience. And each of those PCNs, looking at their individual practice within it, are trying to identify what they need to do to reduce that unwarranted variation. And we will be assessing those plans come the end of this financial year, in terms of deciding whether what they have done, those plans, is actually produce some better outcomes.
Thanks very much. So if we can have short questions and short answers, we'll be able to get through another round. So no pressure, Carleen, but I do want you to inject a health watch perspective here, because I think that's really important.
No worries. Thank you very much. Yeah, I wanted to say that as soon as we talk about access, we do talk about primary care. But I mean, access is access to any healthcare. And from our perspective, some of the more negative comments that we get is around the expense of not just dentistry, which I know has come up, but ophthalmology. So I think that would be one for us to look at as well. And just an interesting statistic that I noticed from our last quarter that's just finished is that the percentage of white people that we have spoken to is 60% in dentistry and ophthalmology, which is much higher than it is in general practice in terms of GPs and hospitals. So I think one of the things we might need to consider is why communities from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities aren't accessing dentistry and ophthalmology as much. And in terms of just access in general, we've been doing these snapshots since COVID, and it has stuck in the last 6 quarters around 7 to 9% negatively. So it's relatively positive, even though there are issues around access.
Thanks, Carleen. Councillor Nagpal.
So my question is about the Babylon GP at Hand service, and if we're sort of making Ealing residents aware of that service. And my understanding is that if you register with them, then you would no longer be registered with your own GP, and perhaps that would alleviate some of the pressures on the local surgeries, and particularly for the more tech savvy users or patients rather. If they switch to that service, then that would free up some space for those who may feel more comfortable going into a surgery. And if we've considered that as an option at all in Ealing, or made that option available to residents.
Thanks. And then my question for Anna, really, off the back of the COVID-19 update, was I attended a meeting in Parliament about COVID and inequalities a couple of weeks ago, and happened to speak with Professor Arden, who was the Director of Public Health in Manchester during the pandemic. One of the things that she said was really critical, and I hope we could bring this to a future meeting, is the scrutiny panel in Manchester had a really, the health scrutiny panel had really clear oversight of the emergency plan. And actually what happened is very quickly, the boroughs that make up the Greater Manchester region came together. So I hope that we might be able to look at the emergency plan as a committee. It may be that it doesn't come into the already busy schedule for this year, and we might see some sort of briefing on it, but I think that would be really helpful. I'll come to Neha and Dr. Taylor first, and then I'll bring you in, Anna.
So just around the GP at hand, I suppose we haven't promoted that as an option for Ealing residents, because it has been out there, and patients can choose which service they register with. And we were conscious that if they then access and register with GP at Hand, they do get deregistered from an Ealing practice. And that practice, GP at Hand, is in Hammersmith and Fulham. And although they would get digital services, when it comes to then providing face-to-face appointments, until we really understood the model, it was difficult to really push a certain approach. But since then, you've also had online consultations then emerge in all practices, and it's become part of the normal way of working and a way of working. It's not the only route into general practice, but that is now part of the NHS contract. So it's sort of become a bit of a moot point because it's helped with capacity, and patients can choose to register whichever practice they choose. So we haven't actively pushed that.
Lovely. And were there comments in response to Carlene's points as well?
Yes, that's obviously that's really interesting to hear about sort of the ethnic mix between the various health professionals that we have, and I wasn't aware in terms of particularly in relation to optometry and dentistry in terms of that ethnicity mix. But again, this is something we can certainly have a look at it. I'm not quite sure what we can do to try and as a borough try and encourage different ethnic mixes to take up whatever health professional that they want to take up. So, but it is certainly something that we can have those conversations with those relevant health professionals when we start that conversation and dialogue around it. With regards to GP at hand, one needs to be careful about some of the messages around GP at hand, and there's been lots of mixed messages and mixed experiences around it. Yes, GP at hand, the practice itself is based in Hammersmith and Fulham. They have their catchment is widespread. They have patients registered right across the country, and that is their model. Their model is that remote primary care services. The problem with GP at hand is when you have individuals with long-term conditions, complex care, who require continuity, they're unable to provide that. And hence those patients end up going back to who their original GP was, because they've been deregistered when they tried to do that. And so it may be suitable for certain cohorts of the population, but certainly if you look at the whole population as a whole, they are not the primary care services provider that can give you that holistic care that patients do require.
Thanks very much. We've got about 2 minutes left on this item. Is there a last question from any panel members? No? Okay, fair enough. Well, we'll move on to item 9, but before doing so, thank you, Neha, thank you, Dr. Taylor, and also, oh, Anna, sorry, I was going to come to you specifically on my question, which I've forgotten. So Anna, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of your answer, yes, that's absolutely something we can bring. So we have very recently, I think last week, taken our COVID lessons learnt review to the Health and Wellbeing Board, so can circulate that. It's on the social media through the council and the website. And there were a number of things in there that we were waiting for to update our pandemic preparedness plan. Which we have locally, and to kind of Ealingize it in the way that we need to, especially in terms of some of the learning coming out of the COVID response. That is being planned for the autumn and winter. So if we can plan something in for next spring, summer, that would be absolutely fine. But Anna-Marie, we can liaise maybe outside the meeting and with our emergency management colleagues who lead that on our behalf, and we can plan something in. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. And just to say that when I was talking with Professor Arden, she was quite happy to lend any expertise from Manchester. So we might want to pick up on that as well. I'm glad that I got an answer to my own question there. So that's good. So thank you, colleagues. Thanks, Neha, Dr. Taylor, and also Anna for your responses. We're moving on to the panel work programme. So I'm just asking for agreement in terms of the items for the next meetings that are coming up in the schedule, and obviously we can flex this as and when, but I do just want to inform you that London North West Healthcare have been invited to present its strategy for Meadow House Hospice at our March meeting. Central and North West London have been invited to the May meeting, and that's specifically on public health. And for colleagues that might have picked up on Twitter, is it now called X, that they won an award for their PrEP programme. So we've invited them to to come along and to talk specifically about the learning and best practice from that. Just wanted to draw your attention also to the letters and the responses that we've had on the autoclaved aerated concrete issue, that those have come back from Neha and also from Pippa from London Northwest NHS Trust, and they've confirmed that there's no RAC in any of the 3 sites, and also at Ealing Hospital. Just also want to remind panel members that we have a visit to Ealing Hospital on Friday, the 6th of October. The main purpose of that visit is to look at the how the plans for the community diagnostic centre are progressing, but it will also now involve a visit to Meadowhouse Hospice as well in advance of the March meeting. Thank you to everybody that's responded, saying that they are coming along. If you do want to join, then please could you let Anna Marie know? That would be really helpful. Can I get agreement on the work programme? Great. Lovely. So that just leaves me to say that the date of the next meeting is the 12th of December. You'll be relieved to know, in the atrium for that meeting and subsequent meetings. And I just want to say I'm really sorry, particularly to members of the public, because it's been quite a long meeting. The room is also quite hot, so we'll remedy that by being in the atrium next time. So thanks very much, colleagues, and have a good evening.